Have you ever noticed how, sometimes, those who most want to be loved end up running away from the very people who want to give them that love? Sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? But the truth is that avoidant attachment is an emotional trap that causes many women to sabotage themselves without realizing it, creating an invisible barrier between them and the emotional connection they so desire. It's as if the fear of intimacy takes over, making the heart beat against desire. In this video, you'll understand why this emotional escape happens, unravel the mysteries of this style of attachment that makes love relationships difficult, and, above all, how to recognize this pattern in order to start transforming it. She feels something strong, but when she realizes she's getting attached, she slams on the brakes. Her heart races, but her steps retreat. It sounds like a contradiction, but it's actually avoidant attachment, a style of attachment born out of the fear of getting hurt again. According to attachment theory, we develop our affective patterns based on the first relationships in life, usually with parental figures. Those who grow up having to deal with unstable affection get used to loving from afar, and worse, running away when love gets too close. This woman who seems cold is often the same one who silently longs for a hug that lasts. The problem is that the fear of intimacy paralyzes her. She has learned that emotional connection is dangerous, that deep emotional bonds can mean pain. So when someone starts to get close with real affection, a self-sabotaging impulse arises. The mind says, "Run," while the heart whispers, "Stay." And then the dance between closeness and emotional distance begins. In practice, this can appear in subtle ways. She avoids deep conversations, keeps her love life under tight control, and interprets any display of affection as a possible trap. And even in love relationships that seem promising, emotional flight appears, that desire to disappear, to disconnect. It's not a lack of love, it's a fear of loving and being seen. And if you happen to be rejected, it's better not to risk it. But how does it all start? The answer may lie back in childhood. She grew up hearing that crying is drama, that the strong one is the one who swallows. And she learned to keep quiet. When a child doesn't find a safe space to express her feelings, she internalizes the idea that showing emotions is dangerous. Little by little, this child builds up an invisible armor, where vulnerability becomes synonymous with weakness. The result? An attachment style marked by emotional blockages and resistance to affection. Think of that woman who shies away from sincere conversations, who shuts down when someone asks if everything is all right, even when it clearly isn't. She may well have come from an attachment style. She may well have come from a home where feelings were ignored, or worse, ridiculed. The avoidance of love begins there, in the small silences imposed, in the scoldings for being too sensitive. She learned early on to hide her pain, and as a result developed emotional detachment as a way of surviving, and this still echoes in her adult life. For example, when she receives affection, she feels uncomfortable. When she notices an emotional connection emerging, she pulls away. Not because she doesn't want to, but because she doesn't know how to cope. The emotional bond seems threatening because it was never taught as something safe. This kind of emotional flight comes from the unconscious fear of giving in and reliving, the emotional abandonment of the past. And then false independence arises, as if she really didn't need anyone. She repeats to herself that she is self-sufficient, that she doesn't depend on anyone, and she believes it with all her might. But behind this shell of independence lies a history of fear of intimacy and emotional escape. What looks like strength is actually protection, a disguised form of self-sabotage. She has learned not to expect support from anyone, so she avoids any chance of creating an emotional bond that would make her relive the feeling of unmet need. She's the woman who solves everything herself, who doesn't delegate, who refuses to help with even the smallest things. Let me do it. She runs away from emotional connection without realizing it, because becoming attached to someone can mean losing the control she fought so hard to have. the avoidant attachment style, teaches her to equate closeness with threat. So, emotional distancing becomes the norm, even when, deep down, she just wanted someone who could see through her armor. Want a practical example? When someone shows genuine interest, she gets suspicious. She questions their intentions, creates a barrier, gets ahead of the breakup before the story even begins. This is proximity avoidance, a defense mechanism to avoid feeling vulnerable again. But is this really freedom? Or just another way of continuing to run away from love? Because when intimacy gets really close, panic sets in. They avoid diving into the deep waters of emotion, because to open up too much is to feel exposed. And that's scary. In avoidant attachment, the fear of love translates into emotional flight, that resistance to affection that prevents a true emotional bond. Even when there is love, the emotional connection is kept on the surface, in shallow dialogues and casual encounters, where there is less risk of getting hurt. Depth is intimidating because it implies vulnerability, and for those who carry emotional traumas, this is almost a sentence. In practice, she prefers quick encounters, light conversations, and avoids talking about her feelings or listening to the other person's. Perhaps she likes to be close, but she doesn't want to. Perhaps she likes to be close, but not too close, because the fear of intimacy blocks any deeper attempt. This avoidance of closeness is not a rejection of love, but a self-sabotage that protects her heart. She wants to love, yes, but she's afraid of what that love might bring in terms of pain and exposure. Have you ever noticed that in many love relationships, the person who most wants to be loved paradoxically runs away when true affection approaches? It's as if there's an internal duel between the desire for connection and the fear of being lost. This silent struggle is what makes avoidant attachment so complex and so challenging to overcome. She receives a simple gesture of affection and, instead of feeling comfort, is invaded by inexplicable discomfort. In avoidant attachment, showing affection can sound like a threat, an invasion that jeopardizes the self-sufficiency that has been built up with so much effort. Imagine someone who lives protected behind emotional walls, suddenly seeing those walls begin to crumble. The fear of losing control is so great that the first reaction is to flee. Resistance to affection acts as a shield against vulnerability. This emotional blockage is not a conscious choice, but a response learned over the years, the result of emotional trauma and the avoidance of love. Small gestures, such as a hug, a compliment, or even an "I love you" can generate internal doubts such as, "What do you want from me?" Or "Will this trap me?" And in this doubt, she often prefers to distance herself rather than open up, preserving the armor of emotional independence. It's as if the love offered is a dangerous invitation, one that she doesn't know if she can accept without losing her freedom. What seems like rejection is actually fear. Fear of loving, and above all, fear of being truly loved. And this conflict only deepens the emotional distance, making it even more difficult to build a healthy, emotional bond. When someone with avoidant attachment receives an invitation to take a step further in the relationship, be it traveling together, living in the same house, or meeting their partner's family, the immediate reaction can be to run away. This withdrawal, however, is not a sign of disinterest or coldness, but a deep fear of losing one's identity and emotional control. It's as if the idea of a more intimate connection triggers an internal alarm, reminding them of the emotional blockages they've worked so hard to erect. For example, imagine being invited to spend a special weekend with your partner, an opportunity to deepen your emotional connection. Instead of accepting, she might make excuses, cancel plans, or simply shut down emotionally. This resistance is an unconscious way of avoiding intimacy, the closeness that threatens her internal defenses. Emotional flight here acts as an escape valve to avoid feeling the fear of love and the fear of losing oneself within the bond. The paradox is that, even though this person desires connection, they retreat when faced with the real chance of getting closer. This resistance to affection and avoidance of closeness are symptoms of avoidant attachment, which struggles internally between the desire for love and the need to preserve one's own emotional security, a dilemma that can seem unsolvable. It's amazing how the person with avoidant attachment feels, deep down, an intense need for love and connection, even if their attitudes seem to contradict this. They want to be loved. They want an emotional bond. But when affection approaches, an invisible barrier appears that blocks this experience. This paradox generates a painful internal conflict. The fear of loving is intertwined with the difficulty of letting oneself be loved, as if both were enemies within one's own heart. It's not a question of coldness or lack of feelings, but of unresolved emotional traumas that prevent us from opening up to a true emotional connection. Self-sabotage, so characteristic of avoidant attachment, works as a protection against vulnerability, the same vulnerability that could bring about a deep and genuine bond. The fear of intimacy appears as an emotional block that limits the expression of affection and the receptivity to receive it. As a result, they can feel lonely, and at the same time, withdraw from those who try to get close, creating a cycle of affective distancing that is difficult to break. The challenge lies in recognizing this resistance to affection and starting to learn, with awareness and care, to allow oneself to build a safer and more welcoming relationship. But is there a way out of this impasse? The good news is that avoidant attachment is not a definitive sentence, much less an insurmountable barrier to true love. The first step is to recognize these internal dynamics: the fear of intimacy, emotional flight, and affective detachment. Without judgment, with a posture of curiosity and acceptance, when you begin to look at these patterns with gentleness, space opens up for new possibilities of emotional bonding, where the emotional blockage can gradually be dissolved. Learning to relate in a safer and more open way requires practice, patience, and often professional help. It's like relearning to dance to a new song. At first it may seem strange, even uncomfortable, but over time, the emotional connection strengthens, and resistance to affection decreases. Simple exercises, such as practicing sharing your feelings, recognizing the body's signals when you feel vulnerable, and seeking support in therapies that work on attachment style, can be transformative. This journey is actually an opportunity to free yourself from self-sabotage and avoidance of love, replacing emotional avoidance with the gentle courage to surrender to affection. By creating a new, lighter, and more genuine pattern of intimacy, the fear of love loses its hold, and the person can finally experience what they have always longed for: true emotional connection. And so the transformation begins, with a simple step that opens the way to love that once seemed impossible. Now that you know all about avoidant attachment and how it can be sabotaging your love relationships, here's an invitation. How about starting to look inwards, recognize these emotional blocks, and take the first step towards a real emotional connection? Think. How many times have you run away from love for fear of exposing yourself or being rejected? How about transforming this emotional flight into the courage to allow yourself to truly feel and be loved? Are you ready to challenge the resistance to affection that you learned in childhood and break away from the self-sabotage that keeps you distanced? Change begins when you accept that loving is not weakness, but an act of strength. So how about committing to practicing vulnerability, even if little by little? With that, your relationships can stop being superficial and gain the depth you deserve. Did you like what you saw here? Do you want to continue learning how to free yourself from avoidant attachment and build healthier emotional bonds? Then subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and come with me on this journey of transformation. Let's understand, grow, and love more lightly together. See you in the next video.